Thank you for joining us today to see what our development team has been working on related to Pharos Blueprint Enterprise. Scott Olswold is Blueprint's product manager, and he will be exploring the features and benefits that Update 2 has to offer. If any questions come to mind during today's event, please type them into the questions area. If we don't have time to get to your questions at the end, we will respond in a follow-up email where we'll share the answers to your questions as well as a link to the recording. So I don't want to keep people waiting any longer. So Scott, I'll hand it off to you.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on your time zone. Thank you for joining us today. The next 45 minutes to an hour will be a mind-blowing presentation of rich information and cool stuff to take out and share with everybody else in the world. So without further ado, today's presentation, we're going to be talking about what's inside Blueprint 5.3 Update 2. There are some major new features within the update, as well as some fixes and improvements on other ones that were introduced in either Update 1 or in previous 5.3 release. Those are the Pharos IPP Service, the Pharos Sentry Print Services, Pharos Print Center had some new improvements. The Pharos Print Scout had some significant updates. There are new workflows for Delegate and Quota printing, as well as some security enhancements that will allow for wider and deeper use of the application for administration and for operational use for customers. The first thing we're going to talk about today is the Pharos IPP service, because it is truly the most exciting part of Update 2. What it means is that we can now print natively from any iPhone or iPad app that supports AirPrint. It also improves our support for Mac OS and Linux, as long as there are CUPS components installed within the Linux systems. We can use directory services for authentication, or we can use email and PIN that was introduced with Update 1. And we're using a standards-based IPPS for secure internet print to the server, as well as IPPS back to the printer for true end-to-end security. So no longer can you use Wireshark to scan somebody's workstation, peel off that PDF that they just printed and share it with everybody else. And a major benefit is that we're removing the need to maintain LPD services on your Windows print servers to manage non-Windows platforms. So gone our LPD service and even trying to use Windows built-in IPPS structure. The IPPS service supports 2 authentication types. The first is requesting username, which is a default standard. Basically what that does is it takes whatever the username is associated with the job as the job owner and uses that as the match for release. So right off the bat, it will not be good for iOS printing, because every iOS device, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad, has the username of mobile attached to it, which would create some deal of confusion on the other side. But if you're not using that environment and you're just using Mac OS, that might be just perfectly fine. The other one is basic. Basic is the same as the HTML basic authentication. But what we've done is we've intercepted what would typically go to IIS, and we've moved it into our Blueprint Directory Services plugin, which means that you can support Active Directory, LDAP or LDAP-S, since that's the new de facto standard from a Microsoft environment, as well as email and PIN. So there's a significant amount of customer support in there. If you're on an iOS or a Mac OS or a CUPS client like Linux, those credentials are stored in the keychain. So when you're first prompted in a basic authentication mode, that credential, sorry, is maintained within the keychain and kept and used until that credential that's stored is no longer valid. For example, if a password has been changed, then you'll get a new prompt, and then it'll be stored again. For iOS printing, we recommend that you use at least version 13.4.1 because it was in that version that Apple fixed a problem within the keychain that could potentially cause multiple login prompts, even if it was already stored. So that's the only really significant deployment configuration that there is on the client side. To deploy the IPP queue that's created by Blueprint, there are several ways to handle that. The first is to basically just send an email with a URL link or a configuration profile, and then the user just clicks on that profile and adds it to their system and can create the printer object, or just use the link to go through the install step on their own. For larger installations, you can use an MDM for mobile device management, like Iron, let's see, what is it? It falls right out of my head. There are several though, or MDM systems that are out there. AirWatch, for example, is one of those, or even Microsoft Intune that can take that config file that you can download from the IPP service and deploy that to users as well. And if you have a bunch of Linux machines, you can use a bash script to support that. And Pharos implementation people, as well as reseller technical folks, will have access to that script so they can modify it on their own. As I mentioned earlier, it is a hosted platform. We host it within IIS in Windows. So in order to access it, you do need a URL. And the URL is comprised of either IPPS or HTTPS as a protocol header. Then your server's fully qualified domain name and port. Then the resource path, which is IPP, and then print, and then something that we call the customer ID, and then the printer name. Within Blueprint, we hide that customer ID away. It's not exposed anywhere. So part of Update 2's payload is a utility called the Pharos IPP queue utility that once you've run that on the server, will give you the URLs for both logging in directly from a client or to download the mobile config profile if you're sending it to an iOS device. Those are right here. Here's for macOS URL, so you can send that to your macOS users. And here's the profile for both macOS and iOS to send to. And if you want to, you can download the profile directly from the server and then just use that within your MDM structure to send out. Deployment considerations. Within Update 2, there is no immediate support for Microsoft Windows clients. That will be coming in a later update, which is going to be released in the mid to late part of September. The IPP printing service will only support PDF, URG, PWG raster, and then something called octet stream. And that allows us to use a regular printer driver that may generate PCL or PostScript and have it accept that as well. If you're using page ranges within the iOS platform, depending on how you configure that page range, the print job count for pages might be the entire file that's sent down rather than just the range, because of how the iOS devices manage the page range printing function. We're working on a way right now to fix that so that we can just use the actual pages that are printed, and that will be available in a later update as well. And because we're using IPPS to get the job to the server, IPPS has to be enabled on the target printer. If it's not, it will not fall back to IPP, and it will not fall back to port 9100 or raw. So if the target device doesn't support IPPS, the job won't print out. But it will requeue like it does normally within Blueprint, so they can reprint to a different device that does have it enabled, or they can print it to that other device that they wanted to in the first place once that configuration has been changed. By default, the printer name is Secure Print. That can be changed by editing the control file within Blueprint. You can also change the web port to listen on. The default again is 443 because that's the standard HTTPS port. If you need to change the server name to something more friendly, you can. And you can also, within the config file, change your paper size support. Right now we support legal, letter, tabloid, A4, and A3 paper. If you need to support other paper sizes, then those can be added. Finishing options, we support basic stapling as well as punching for like a 3-hole punch. If you need to add others, then those can be added there as well. And by default, we support both color and black and white color modes. If you only want your user to print in black and white, you can change that as well. And then that'll only print black and white in that environment. And you can also change it to be a color printer with a default mode of black and white if you'd like to. Within Sentry Print Services, which was introduced with Blueprint 5.3, we've added HP as a new OEM. So you can now deploy the Sentry SE50 client to both Ricoh devices and HP devices within Print Center. For those that have not seen or looked at that since its release in Blueprint 5.3, it provides a modern, intuitive interface across all your devices. It allows you to log on, release jobs. You can capture device activity for copy and scan. And we've introduced an offline mode so that if the analyst or the database happen to be offline, then we can still continue to work normally. From a management standpoint, if you need to move devices from one server to another, we now offer a re-register function, which is faster than unmanaging and then remanaging again, which was the previous path that had to be taken. These are some screens for the C50 for HP. This is the login screen that's default, and that's what you see on the device as long as the machine has not been logged into and is out of sleep mode. This is the Sentry home screen where you can either print all your jobs by clicking on the big yellow button, or you can click on the Review Documents button to take a look at what's in your queue currently. Or you can hit More Device Functions and go directly to the device's home screen to do things like copy and scan and fax and whatever else. If you need to go back to this environment for any reason, you can just click the Sentry Print icon on the home screen, or you can log out within the main screen, or you can do it within the Sentry Print function as well. Offline support is new. When we first released Sentry Print, if there was any component in the system that was offline for any reason, let's say that your analyst went down because somebody accidentally rebooted the server or the database was unavailable, then Sentry would not let you in. What we've done is we've allowed some of that data to be cached locally on the collectors so that the user experience is not affected by an offline component upstream, which is great. But at the very bottom there, if the collector that's hosting your printer goes down, you're still out of luck. We cannot fix that part. From a technology standpoint, every screen that you do see over here is actually just a web page that's displayed on the HP by the collector. So like in a regular web server scenario, if the web server is gone, then the web pages are also gone too. The nice thing is that offline mode is automatic. There's nothing to configure, it just happens. So right out of the box, Update 2 will support offline mode without anything on your part. And then re-registering is also the new function that's released with Update 2. What you basically do is you go to your Secure Printers tab within Print Center, select the printers that you need to move, and then when you click the Secure button, if you change the hosting server in that UI, then the button goes from Secure to Re-register. Just click the Re-register button, and it basically just pushes down a new configuration so it goes to the proper server and no reboot for the device is required. Pharos Print Center has new improvements as well. Pharos Print Center is that kind of forgotten utility part of Blueprint that can be really handy for both administration and users. And we're trying to push people more towards that as an administrative option because pretty soon that's going to be the only way to manage Blueprint. Within this release, we offer better control over the print button. So previously, when you wanted Print Center, you could either disable the print button or enable the print button, and that was a site-wide function. And what we ended up running into was situations where a site would want to offer guests the ability to choose the print button so that they could just pick a printer and release it versus having to walk up without any credentials and try to release that way, but didn't want their employee population to have it. Or they wouldn't want, say, upper management to have access to it, but not everybody else. So what we've done is we've allowed that to be granted as a logon right so that you can or can't based on your group membership. If you're using our SSO integration for either, what is it, CA Site Sense, I think it is called, or within CAS proper. Now that supports the administrative roles as well, so you can log in using SSO and still have administrative control of Print Center. You can now install Print Center on a separate server. So if you need to create a DMZ type environment where you've got a public access point into Print Center, now we can install it that way as well. We've improved the Print Scout secure release management function, and we are also allowing network logon IDs to not be displayed within Print Center for those folks that view that as a security problem. So the Print Center button, we've always had the ability to print using the job list, but it's been an all or nothing setting, which was not very flexible. So what we've done is we can either allow printing for employees or guests or both. And if you're using print enablement for employees, you can now group employees into Active Directory groups and then push that group into a logon role so that when they log into Print Center, they see it if they're in the group, and they don't if they don't. It's pretty easy to set up. You just go into the Blueprint Administrator, check the boxes for either employees can print or guests can print. Those are both disabled by default. You can restrict printing role to just that function in Print Center, and go from there. Once you've defined those boxes for enablement, then you just go into the login screen from within the dashboard. You add a logon for that Active Directory group, and then give them the logon role of Print Center release, and then they'll be part of that group as well. So it's pretty straightforward and easy to implement. And you can do that for multiple groups if you need to. Allowing Print Center availability for public endpoints allows you to put the Print Center server into a DMZ so that your public users can access it. And then it will also then feed back into the server farm behind that's protected from that public capability for the purposes of job upload and job management. And if you are a print user, then you can release them from your hotel room if you want to too, all without a VPN. Within the Print Center and the system management function, we now have a progress meter or a ticker of how many WebSocket connections are there for Print Scout Secure Release. Historically, when we added the ability to use the Print Scout to be the secure release endpoint at the workstation, management was Well, if you can write it down and track it that way, then that's how you can track it. And we really didn't have much of a tool set around the management of that function or to see exactly if you were overrunning the server with connections or not. We've added this now to the health report as well as the system monitoring view, so you can see it at a glance to see what's happening. We do maintain the last 20 data points within that graph so that you can see what your historical trend has been, as well as the number of connections at the current point. You'll notice that by default, we have a threshold of 18,000 connections. So that means that we've stress tested and we found that the typical server that we've seen in environments, which is typically a 2 CPU, 4 GB RAM with adequate hard disk space, can support about 18,000 unique client connections. So we've matched that as the threshold. If you need to manage that up or down based on your server's horsepower, go ahead and do so. You just need to do that within the general settings config file, and you're all set to go. And then you can monitor that display. Hiding network names in Print Center has been a recent request that we've been able to implement fairly quickly. When you're in the Print Center application, if you're just seeing your own things, then that's fine. But if you are implementing things like delegates so that users can pick other users to release their print jobs, quota management, or even stuff within the job list, you may not want to show what another user's login ID is, because those are typically held as personal identifying information in some companies. So all you need to do is go ahead into the Blueprint Administrator and untick the box, or tick the box actually, to hide the network user ID within the Print Center. And once that's been enabled and applied, that happens immediately. So as users either log into Print Center or refresh their views, the network ID goes away. So in this case, we have the network ID in the top of r.giscard. And then when we go back after we've made that configuration change and look at that view again, we don't see that network ID anymore. And that's available then as a security feature. The Pharos Print Scout has seen some updates as well. The first, and is probably cause for much celebration, is the fact that we do not have to install Silverlight anymore with the Print Scout. Microsoft has stopped development of Silverlight in favor of other technologies like HTML5 and cascading style sheets. So there are a lot of organizations that are choosing to remove Silverlight from workstations because since it's been deprecated, it poses some degree of security risk. So we've removed it entirely. Update 1, we were using it for policy print, but that was the only thing. And in update 2, we are also converting that over to the unauthenticated Print Scout function as well. So it's not needed anymore. Also, within the Print Scout, when it was installed, it installed the Pharos certificate authority root, and some companies didn't like that because they wanted to be able to manage the certificates and the CAs that were there on their computers by themselves. So what we did was we allowed the installer to have a no certificate switch. When you add that to either the the EXE or the MSI installer for Print Scout, it will not install the certificate and allow you to manage the certificates on your own. And then also when you are in secure print mode for Print Scout, when that was first released and up until just recently, as soon as the Print Scout service started, it maintained a persistent bidirectional WebSocket connection with whatever it was listed as its home server. And some people just don't print a lot, but they print enough to make it worthwhile to have there. So what we've done is we've made that more of an on-demand service. So when the workstation starts up, that socket connection is not made, until the user submits their first print job. And then as long as there's a job in their queue, that socket is maintained, but as soon as their job count is 0, that socket is destroyed and we wait for another one. And that helps manage socket connections to the server a little bit more efficiently and allows you to also push more clients to a single server if you need to optimize load because they're not always connected, and that can help tremendously. From a user experience and solution management standpoint, we have revamped how quotas and delegates work. On the quota side, it makes it easier to add delegates and manage them, and it also makes the delegate function less noisy when you are using it. And quotas allows you to better manage what types of volumes are going to devices based on people's behavior, not so much by what the device can do. Our experience has been that it's easier to manage people than it is devices because devices just do what people tell them to do. So let's talk about that now. Quota management, again, quotas are used to ensure that page volumes for a group of people stay within the expected threshold. Why is this important? Well, in some parts of the world, and including here in the US, when you buy a device, you don't just buy an all-you-can-eat kind of function. You buy a device based on the number of copies or prints that it should be able to make in a month. And then if you go over that budgeted limit, the service provider can actually charge you more money than what the per copy price was before for what they call the overage use. So Quota helps manage that volume a little bit better. And if you've identified within your organization that, like, a person prints maybe 200 pages a month, then you can set a quota for that group times 200 and see if that ratio still persists or if you see a downward or an upward trend. The quotas are not hard stop, so if you've reached a quota, you can still print, but there is messaging involved at that point so that either the quota owner or the quota users all see who is being the bad Charlie on that one. New to update 2, we got rid of the bulky quota manager function, which was very difficult to manage. It required that you had a user within Blueprint that had an email address, that was an actual person, that had employees, and it was just nuts. It was a lot of back-end administrative work to make sure that that worked like it was supposed to. So what we did was we pulled that out and we just made a quota manager administrative role within Blueprint, so that can be anybody that's specified in the system, whether they have an email address or not. And then there's the operational role of quota owner. And that used to be what the quota manager was, but there is less, meaning a quota owner no longer has the ability to define quota settings. They just own the quota from a group standpoint. Any administration has to happen by the quota manager. And they could be the same people, depending on the size of your site, but they are separate from a function standpoint. And then when you're defining your quota, you can either set your quota up as a per employee, so whatever numbers you put in the quota limits can apply to just the employees alone, or they can be shared per group. And then there's more flexible email notifications, including modifiable messaging, so that you can tailor what you want to send to your users a little bit easier than what it was before. The quota management interface is within Print Center. So as long as you have that quota manager role, you can go into the quota management tab and you can look at whatever quotas you currently have available, the settings for each, how you want your email to be handled, as well as the employees that are assigned to those quotas. So in this case, the robots have taken over. So we have a quota name called Human Printing. The owner for that is Giscard from the Asimov robot series. And the quota limits apply to the entire group, with 1,000 pages for the group for the month in black and white and 500 for for the month for color. And then if that quota happens to be broken, then we get a message. So in this case, it's going to Job Logs, and we look at Patricia Wang and Grayson Gray and Patrick Paneer and Malu Pitt, and we see how much they've been printing, how much of the percent of the quota they've consumed, and we see this point that it's Grayson Gray who is the person that has exceeded the quota limits for the month and caused that to happen. So at this point, then we can figure out why Grayson's printing so much. Maybe it's a business need that's made that happen, or perhaps Grayson is a mini Kinko's and is doing some document production and distribution for either his church, a social organization, or his kids' science project. Delegates is a commonly asked for and sometimes misunderstood function in Blueprint. The delegate function allows me as a manager to delegate my print jobs so that my employees or my secretary or a colleague can also then release it if they've gone to their device. So there's the delegator, that's me, and the delegatee, that's you, so that you can release my print jobs. Again, it's usually there so that administrative assistants can release their manager's print jobs, but it also helps when you're in a collaborative situation. Rather than email a file, you can print it to the secured queue, assign somebody as a delegate, and if they happen to be in Washington State and you're in New York State, then they just get that with a regular print job release and can do with it what they need. New in Update 2, there's the ability to choose how the delegate assignment is set up. It can be either global, which means that every job that you send gets assigned to your delegate, or you can make it a manual process, which means that once I've printed my jobs, I can go into Print Center and I can pick the ones that I want to make delegatable and leave the others alone. For example, I may not want my resume to be released by a coworker or somebody's letter of retribution, but I might want, like, I don't know, research data to be printable, so I can manage it that way. And also within the administrative function, I can choose whether I want email notification to happen or not for both the job arrival, which means, hey, you've got mail, or job release, which is, hey, your mail's just been read. The employee and guest interaction, you basically log into Print Center and go to the Delegate Printing tab once it's been enabled. You can add, remove, or disable delegates from there. Or if you want to, you can click the Add button, which gives you a search dialog box so that you can search for the delegates that you want for your jobs. And that can be either using their network ID, their email address, maybe it's their first and last name, or any other attribute that can be had. Customizing the search experience has always been an ask, so we're delivering that here. If you want to find either delegates or quota members, when you're in that add box, you can use the email address, their network ID and name or whatever, and then you can also specify what wildcard should be used when searching. So if you, for example, want to be able to search by, I'm going to make one up, job function. If you have a title LDAP attribute, then you can put the title LDAP attribute in the search list, and you can search for assistant, for example, and then pick yours from the list. The cool part is that you also can change the header of what's inside this search dialog box for add delegate, for example. So you can say, hey, you can search by name, email address, or location code. And then you can deploy that, and you can basically train the users without training them. And you can roll it out a lot quicker that way. So to customize the search description text, you go into Print Center with your administrative account. You go to the Themes tab and go to Text. And there's a delegate search description text box that allows for 2 trillion characters or more. So you can make it pretty verbose if you want to. I would suggest you make it smaller than that. And then save the changes. And again, it's an immediate availability and there's nothing to restart. From a security standpoint, we've added 2 new functions within Update 2. The first is a job name obfuscation that happens at the collector. So it's even before the job gets to the analyst for upload into Blueprint's database. And the cool part is that you can do that collector by collector, so it doesn't have to be a global thing. So if you have a collector that's available for general folks and you don't care, then that's fine. But if you have a collector that's dedicated to research and development or your CIA branch, then you can just enable it there and then nobody can see what those job names are. And then we've also extended the group function for policy print to include distribution groups. So if you're not using security groups or you use them for limited functions, but you like using distribution groups for other delegated tasks, then you can now use those in Blueprint. Hashing document names make the seen unseen. All you need to do within the global config file, there's a hash job name in there. Change the value from false to true. Restart your taskmaster service and you're done. The jobs are hashed using a SHA-256 cipher that's based on, in part, the site code as a secret, which means that you cannot try to decipher some other place's job name if they've enabled that function because you wouldn't have the right code. Once you do enable it, however, that job name encryption cannot be reversed. So it just stays that way forever and ever and ever within Blueprint's database. It may interfere, for example, with an info security type situation where they want to take a look at job names for some reason. So use it with eyes wide open on that one. Distribution groups and lists can now be used within Blueprint. It's preferable just to use it for policies, but you can, if necessary, use it for just role features. So in Active Directory, a distribution group is an email-enabled group with no security context, and that's why we suggest you not use them for logon roles. By enabling the distribution list in Blueprint, you can now add those groups to things like policy print assignments and go forward that way. We have here a chart of what happens based on the ability to either allow global groups, which is also a function of Blueprint that's been there for at least the past 3 releases, as well as distribution lists. So if I have global groups set to false and distribution lists set to false, then we could only use universal security groups. If global groups is set to true and distribution list is set to false, then you can use both universal and global security groups. If global groups is set to false and distribution list is set to true, then we can use universal security as well as distribution groups. And if you have allow global groups set to true and distribution list set to true, we can use both universal and global security and distribution groups. That's fun. So be careful how you combine your configuration because you may accidentally open it up to select groups or users that you don't want to. So I would suggest test, test, test. This is also a good point to let you know what's coming up. So update 2 will be officially released next week on Monday. And if you need, you can contact support, and it can be made available now so that you can do some testing on your own before you try to implement somewhere else. Update 3 is going to be released sometime in September. I'm thinking late September, right, sometime around the 23rd, I believe. It will support touchless support for Sentry SE50, which means that basically once you swiped your card at your HP or your Ricoh or coming soon Canon, Konica Minolta, Lexmark, and Xerox terminals, it will give you a message that says your print jobs will automatically print in 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever seconds you want to implement automatically unless you hit the cancel button. So as we do return to work from our isolation since March, we can start doing touch-free printing from Blueprint. We're also implementing QR codes as well as a new Pharos print app for both iOS and Android that will allow you to use your mobile device's camera feature to scan the QR code that's at the printer. And then that will launch a mini version of Print Center with that printer selected already. So all you have to do is tick the boxes of the jobs that you want to print and hit the print button on your cell phone and not have to touch the copier's control panel at all. The Sentry SE50 client will be extended to also include Canon, Konica Minolta devices, Lexmark devices, and Xerox. So that will complete all of our legacy IMFP line, which means, yes, we will soon be deprecating the legacy IMFP line in support and in deference to the SE50 product. We will also introduce Windows 10 support for the Pharos. It's not really the Universal Printing Service. We had to make a name change because Microsoft stole that. It's really the IPP service there. This means that you don't have to do any server queues for any secure release function at all. There will be a built-in driver, and I'm going to use that in quotes, for Windows 10 using Print Center if you want to use it and deploy it that way. Basically, all you'll need to do when you're installing Print Scout is do a /IPP equals and then a server name that's hosting the IPP service, and then it will build a print queue on the workstation that prints directly to that server via IPP only. If you don't want to do it that way, that's fine. If you want to implement your own driver for whatever reason, let's say you want to use some feature on an HP that we're not supporting in our driver, then you can just use that driver instead and deploy it with the IPPQ definition, and they will be able to print that way. Mobile Print 2.4, which will be coming out shortly, will also have included support for that because that introduces some new configuration changes in terms of Office 365 and Gmail connectivity. We also will be including some job handling efficiency improvements. Right now, within update 2, the IPP service can support 60 jobs a second, and the improvements allow us to basically quadruple that. So busy servers really don't need to be an issue, and the users won't really see much of a difference in release. They'll just see it disappear faster. And with that, we've got some time for some Q&A. We have a couple of questions now already in the list. The first one is KM supported for Sentry Print? And it is not in update 2, but it will be in update 3. Somebody else has asked, can you create and manage delegate groups? Within that function, no. The delegate function is still managed at the user level by the user who wants to send a delegate out. So there's nothing that's like a function in Blueprint, whether it's Print Center or the administrator lets you create predefined groups. I'm going to make this bigger here. We've got another ask. Would that IPP for Universal Print be secured? Yes, the IPP print service only uses IPPS. It is certificate driven, so certificate management and distribution is important in that one. We don't do IPP for obvious reasons because you can just scam the print job and it's potentially dangerous because that could happen over the internet. We've got, let's see here. IPP
Scott,
is not, yeah.
I was just going to say while you're reading through a couple of them, can I just mention something real quick about upcoming events?
You may.
That'll give you some time to look through
Digest a
the
couple.
questions that are on there. Yeah, yeah. So while Scott's just looking through a couple of the questions, I just wanted to say that we are confirming dates and times for several events every month from August all the way through December. So we'll have one upcoming on touchless printing for a safer return to the office. Others about sharing actions you can take with data you collect on print users and devices themselves, as well as a webinar giving you a tour of our online community and support portal that we recently combined into one platform. And related to that, we're still in progress of migrating documentation, tagging and organizing content, and making certain areas look nice. So we're really looking forward to having you hop on that webinar so we can give you an official tour and hear your feedback on that site as we continue to improve upon it each week. So you want to stay tuned for more events from us. We're hoping to have 2 every month all the way through the end of the year. So Scott, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions around the use of the IPP service. The first is IPP a replacement for mobile print? It is not. It is another way just to get jobs into the secure release environment. So mobile print is still alive and well. It is actually being enhanced to support better integration with other email type providers so that you can still send email queues out or have an email address available for those users that may not have ability to do IPP. One of the things about IPP is that it will be line of sight for iOS devices. So if you are sending your iOS users a IPP queue through the mobile config utility, they will need to have immediate access to that. So they have to use a VPN, for example, to get into it, which may not be possible for whatever reason. So mobile print is still there for primarily an email-based workflow, but you can still use the iOS or the Android app to upload documents as well. So it's just a companion product. Does IPP replace the current Blueprint 5.3 secure release queue? You will be able to with update 3 for your Windows users. So basically update 2 is a first iteration to support mobile devices and a better integration for Mac OS and Linux. Update 3 will include broader client support because we can finally roll in Windows 10. That'll be a 64-bit experience only. For our driver, since we don't have a 32-bit one, we just use a 64. But if you have 32-bit clients or you need a 32-bit driver, then you can still implement your own. But at that point, then yes, you would not need any queue or the print spooler service running on your servers. Does Sentry SE50 replace HP IMFP? In the current implementation, no. But like I said earlier, once we have manufacturer support across our historical platforms, the HP IMFP and the other IMFPs for like Xerox and Canon and Ricoh, for example, will eventually become end of life, since the Sentry SE50 represents a more readily deployable platform. Will a new authentication method be required to use Sentry SE50? No. It still uses blueprints. So whatever you have in place right now, whether it's to an LDAP server or an Active Directory server, or you're using card swipe or a combination of card swipe and user ID and registration and no registration, that still all applies. So there's no need to do anything different unless you have a wacky function in your login script that does something that would be outside of like an authentication mechanism. Does My Print Center replace Print Scout? It does not. You can use My Print Center in conjunction with mobile print to basically upload PDF and Word documents and Excel and PowerPoint and that kind of thing to Print Center for release later, but it doesn't replace Print Scout. Somebody has a question about the document name hashing. Because they already have a document name obfuscation component in their print spooler. So if you have document name obfuscation in the print spooler function already, you should not need to use the new function built into update 2. In fact, I would probably say you don't use it. But in the end, if you did, it would just mean that the document name would be a bunch of characters, but they'd always be the same characters. Do we have a limit of delegates for each delegator? Yes. It depends on how you ask the question. So if I'm the delegator, I can only define up to 10 people that can also release my print jobs. But if I'm a delegatee, I could be a delegatee to an unlimited number of other people, which would make my life hard because I'd never be able to print my own stuff because the job list would be so long I would never, ever, ever be able to manage it. So an administrative assistant, for example, could be a release point for 20 different managers, but those 20 different managers can only delegate up to 10 people each. So I hope that answers your question. Do we have the limit of print jobs to be visible from the delegate's perspective? That's a fun one. You really, within Blueprint and even within Uniprint and Beacon, a large number of jobs, let's say 300, can cause problems for the end user because they have to do a lot of scrolling back and forth on a tiny, tiny screen to figure out what they need to release. So that is a risk. If they're using Print Center, you still have a pagination feature, but that's more controllable. So you can choose either show me 20 jobs at a time or 40 or 80 or 100 or whatever, and that can give you different lists to course through. But it's still limited. Within the SE50 client, for example, we force a 50 job page limit. So even if you have 200 jobs in your queue, the only number that you can see at once is 50. You would have to release jobs or delete jobs to see the other ones. So there's that. Does IPP act as branch office direct printing from Microsoft but secured end-to-end? No, that is a different function. Microsoft within branch office direct printing basically takes the server queue and sends it to the local device as if it was a local queue and uses some networking in the back end to make that job appear as if it's doing things quick. And that is not actually the case. So it's not. IPP will still be server driven. So if you have a 250 megabyte PowerPoint file that you send to the server and it generates a 2.3 gigabyte spool file, then you'll still be sending 2.3 gigabytes up to the print server and then back again when you release. So that is another consideration that you have to take a look at when you're deploying this. Let's see. Which update will allow more than 500 print jobs to be released to the printer without getting an error? That is a problem within the devices themselves. For example, within HP, there is a functional limit to the size of the payload that interface can display. And if you run past that, then the machine is going to have a fit. HP, for example, has made some software changes to address that limitation, but it's still a limitation. They just pushed it out a little bit more. So that's something that we can't fix. Within the HP SE50 client, since that's just a web page specifically, that's where we've gone through on our side, and we've chosen to limit the total number of jobs at any given moment to 50 so that we don't have that display performance issue. And
I think you got
that,
them all.
Lindsay, is the end of them. Yep.
Wow, good job.
Thank
A few
you.
minutes to spare. All right.
Fast talking me.
Yeah. So I just want to thank everyone who joined us today, and to you, Scott, for introducing us to Blueprint Enterprise 5.3 Update 2. If anyone has questions or comments that come to mind after we end this webinar today, please don't hesitate to reply back to the follow-up email we'll be sending with a link to this recording, or reach out to anyone at Pharos, and we are happy to help get you the answers you need. You can find a complete list of upcoming events as well as recordings to past ones on the Pharos website event page. And we hope to see you at future events. Please stay healthy and safe. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at future events. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.